Hello friends, in this video we're going to look at this Yamaha Natural Sound AV Receiver model RX-V367. Picked this up at a thrift store recently for $12.99. They've gotten some discounts on it, I'm not sure if I remember. This is from about 2010. It's got some of the modern features. Cinema DSP is Yamaha's brand name for their signal processing technology. It's got HDMI and Dolby surround sound. On the front, it looks rather basic. We've got buttons for all the usual things, features that you'd expect. Scenes input, big volume knob, phones, power, just ordinary type stuff. I haven't plugged this in yet, so I don't know if it works or how well or what parts of it work, but we'll do that next. It's kind of a basic smoke check. I always run it through this watt meter first and power strip. Turn it on, 123 volts, about 0.7 watts ambient. So we'll hit the power button. If we get some lights, it says main on, straight. I know that from other Yamaha receivers that that means it's kind of going straight through without any conditioning. Approximately 36 or 7 watts. So far so good. This is a good time to introduce you to my new buddy Scooter. We just got him yesterday from a shelter. He's still getting comfortable and getting to know us, but he's made a lot of progress in one day. The fact that he's eating his food right in front of me is actually a good sign. I'm probably 7 or 8 feet away. Say hi, Scooter. I've read up on this just a little bit, so I know it dates from 2010 from what I've read. We've got 4 HDMI inputs and 1 output, so that's appropriate for the period. We've also got component video and composite video. So in 2010 we were probably at a transition point where HDMI was kind of beginning to take over, but you still had an interest in legacy video standards for DVD players and so forth. This, I understand from the documentation, is some sort of accessory port for a Bluetooth adapter and so on. So for our purposes here, that's essentially something we can neglect. We have normal right and left for the front, surround right and left and center. So this is a 5 channel receiver with a subwoofer output, making it 5.1. I've been seeing a lot of these at thrift stores, and my experience has been that it really seems to swirl around the obsolescence of the video sections. So maybe this one will not pass 4K HDMI signals, I'm not sure, but that seems likely since it's 10 years old. Another thing that people expect nowadays is 7.1 or is it 7.2, I can't remember, but they expect the 7-channel AV receivers instead of 5, although my experience has been that content that you find on streaming is typically only available in 5, and I'm not sure that 7 really enhances your experience very much. I've never even bothered to try to hook that up to my more modern one that supports that. But your mileage may vary. Now, continuing our tour, we've got some audio inputs and outputs. We've got monitor out, which is probably to hook up a television monitor of some kind to monitor the composite video. AV out, audio out. This is a standard 75 ohm FM antenna, little standard 2-wire loop AM antenna could be used here, I'm sure. They show the power consumption of 250 watts. I'm not sure what the channel power is without looking that up, but we can't really tell that from the back here. And here's something to look for if you buy used AV receivers. This has optical inputs. So let's say you chance on something like this and you want to watch 4K with surround sound. Well, if you hook up whatever your streaming device is, or maybe it's even built into your TV, and forget all this HDMI stuff. So if you hook up the optical output of the TV into one of these optical inputs, now you've got a 5-channel audio system that you picked up at a thrift store for, you know, very modest price. And you know, you don't really care about the fact that it's 4K because that's going directly into the TV anyway. So I think a lot of people are getting rid of these with the idea that they're obsolete and don't support 4K, which is true, except that they're not really obsolete if you use them right. And in particular, assuming this works and is fully functional, the audio section of this for the 5.1 channels is just as good as it ever was, as is the AM and FM tuner and the audio switching functions. So aside from wanting to have the latest and greatest, you know, a unit like this still has a lot to offer. So maybe you have the latest and greatest in your man cave, but you use something like this in a secondary setup, such as a bedroom or something. So next I'm going to hook it up to speakers and see what it sounds like. I've gone ahead and hooked up a standard FM dipole antenna. Got my phone hooked up through the auxiliary inputs. Also got the speakers hooked up through this speaker selector box. So now let's turn it on and see what happens. Go to radio first. FM. We'll go down in tuning to 89.3. Looks like it's kind of stopping along the way for other stations. Okay, probably need to go up in volume. Not hearing anything so far. That usually means some sort of cockpit error on my part. I worked through some miscellaneous issues. I'm not quite sure what went wrong or right, but I've kind of fiddled with things and got it going. I've got AM 610, which is a sports broadcast of the Royals. We've got Hunter Dozier with bases loaded, 2 outs, looking for a grand slam. We may never know if he actually gets it. Here we are on FM. That works fine. Let's go to the aux that I'm plugged into for the, to turn up our volume here a little bit on the phone. The output of this phone is kind of on the weak side, so I have to crank it up a little bit. This is called Who's Using Who by the Many Vandals. So everything here seems to work. Turn that down a little bit. Now this has programs that I've seen on other Yamaha AV receivers. This is sci-fi, adventure, drama, mono movie, sports, action, role-playing, all in music. Basically, those are all just simulated surround effects. And we really can't tell a lot about those from just a 2-speaker setup, which is what I've got right now. But anyway, so far so good. So I think we've got enough here to go ahead and pop the lid and see what's under the hood. But before we do that, we'll go back to AM and find out that I have no idea what happened in the big 2 on and 2 out. This unit has a pretty standard setup on screws. It's got 2 on each end, several on the back, and then there's a lip under here that pulls out, which I'll show you next. I've got all the screws out, so typically this just slides out with a little finagling. There's a little lip there that would catch. And voila, here we have the inside. So it's pretty dusty after being around for 10 or 11 years. But everything looks in good shape aside from the dust. We'll just go through the sections here, which are pretty typical of what I've seen. We've got a standby power circuit here, which is a little transformer, diodes, and associated elements. That typically runs the board that kind of does the master turn on from a remote control. So with this type of unit that can turn on from a remote control, you always need a small amount of ambient power running continuously. We've got the large power transformer, that's the main power supply. Got AC here coming in on one side, lots of different colors coming out. So this must have lots of different power supplies that are kind of run independently. See over here, these large capacitors kind of suggest to me that this is the biggest area of the power supply. We've got 3 different colors in this area. Maybe this might be a bidirectional output from the transformer that's center tapped AC. Here we've got a little RF converter, which is you can tell by the connection to the AM and the FM. This is kind of self-contained and delivers some sort of signal, possibly even digital at this point. In fact, it very likely is with this ribbon cable here. This is a very thin ribbon cable. We've got, this is the HDMI interface board and may include some other features. So we've got probably, some sort of cross point switch for HDMI, as well as, it says DTS, which has to do with the signal processing. So this may be the main signal processor of the unit. Probably is. Here we got this large heat sink with multiple transistors on it that I can't see real clearly. Looks like they're under this kind of hold down thing. And on this board, these chips are, in my experience, these are typically full wave rectifiers. So we probably got 3 different power supplies being created at this point, with associated filtering capacitors. Here we see the back side of the control interface board, which probably contains a microprocessor and drivers for the buttons and switches and things. The testing that I did showed that the volume control had some problems. You typically see that in analog volume controls, but this is a digital volume control. It just basically tells the rest of the system up or down, and then it works it out from there, turns it into decibels, and then somehow has some sort of digital attenuator or maybe built into the signal processing. So I may spray that out just for kind of just in case, but probably it's okay now that I've worked it a little bit. Down inside here deeper, we've got some miscellaneous capacitors, and you notice the technology that we've got here for board construction, which is we've got a lot of these kind of jumper wires, which indicates this is a one-sided PC board for kind of low cost. This type of digital board is always multi-layers, like in my experience usually at least 6 layers for any kind of complex digital circuit board. And you know, we got cables to connect these things, and over here is a board that's relatively basic, but it seems to be really just a right angle interconnection board with some you know, maybe a little bit of mechanical support for this overall unit here. These blue things are just strain relief things for the cables to keep those from flopping around. So from a inspection or reuse standpoint, everything here looks good. I will blow the dust out of it with a dust can, just as kind of good practice while I've got it open. But there's no sign of any damage or anything that's wrong here. So this is a good unit that's ready to sell with a little bit more cleaning. Look how thick that dust is. So I'll put the lid back on it and we'll go from there. It turns out that my thought that this was ready to be buttoned up and then ultimately sold was wrong. I've since tried it out a little bit more and found that it does have some significant problems. At some level I kind of sensed that from the fact that it was acting a little flaky. The problems seem to be bigger than just a cockpit problem as I described them earlier. So let's turn this on and see if it does what it did a few minutes ago. So at the moment it's behaving okay. I've got everything disconnected from it. But then, as you just saw, the lights on the front begin to flicker and it ultimately shuts itself off. So let's try that one more time. You see that's flickering, which it shouldn't do. A few clicks. And then see if it shuts itself off again. Anyway, that's what it's been doing. The things that it does are kind of inconsistent. I'm going to go ahead and shut it off now and unplug it just to be safe. After having unplugged it and taken the cover off, I did a basic physical inspection, which is always your first troubleshooting step. I had found that this cable wasn't plugged in quite tight, which may or may not be an issue. But after looking around this, it may not be easy to see in the video, but this capacitor has a distinct bulge on it, and that compares to these others that are slightly concave. This one is convex, and that's a sign of a bad capacitor. So what may be happening here is it could be that this capacitor has gone bad, or it could be that there's some larger problem that has made this capacitor go bad. So we don't know that without a lot of work. This unit is worth maybe $100 on a resale value. I've got $12 or less into it so far. It's got a lot of good parts in it, and I think this is going to end up being something that I'm going to do kind of a hybrid of what I normally do. I'm going to make a half-hearted attempt to fix this, and if it doesn't work out, I'm going to just scrap it for all its good parts. Basically, we've got a lot of good power supply elements here, and other things, as well as my experience has been high-tech things like this HDMI board typically aren't really useful. You know, pull a few capacitors off of that and that's about all that you can do with it. You know, this RF module wouldn't be useful in any way unless you knew what the specifications for this cable are. And you know, I don't really need an AM/FM tuner anyway in a hobby sense. So my plan at this point is to do a very careful disassembly and film that. You can watch me do it. I'll try to make it as fast on the video as possible. But basically, the overall goal is to get this board out so that I can pull and replace this capacitor. Hopefully I have one like that in the junk box, but you know, who knows, or I could order one. But the complication here is that this is tied ultimately with a lot of screws and things to this heat sink, and there's also mechanical, like these things that look like circuit boards are basically mechanical components. So the strategy here would be to either sort of lift this whole thing out as a whole as much as possible, or as I think about this more, it's probably going to be a matter of disconnecting this board completely, taking out the screws that go with the power transistors, and hopefully being able to get this board on kind of an individual basis. So the general construction of this, it seems to be a lot of the cables are soldered on one side and have a connector on the other side. So like in this case, you know, I can leave this alone but pull this from the connector here. On this longer one, this is soldered on this side but has a connector on this side. And as a matter of fact, as I look at it, it looks like almost everything on this board has the connector on it, and the soldered end is on the end of something else. That'll also give me a chance to check out some of the power supply circuitry here, maybe in isolation. Now the flickering display light, I think it's a fluorescent display, maybe LED, I'm not quite sure. The flickering thing really kind of suggests a power supply issue, and that could very well relate to this cap. So I think the repair is going to be, in the simplest case, it's replace this cap and all is well, or go to a lot of trouble, replace the cap, and the thing is still useless. And at that point, it's going to make sense to just scrap it. This is an older unit that's kind of on the low end of its feature set, even for 2010. So, you know, the ability to sell it when it, even for parts, is just really not there. You got a big purr, don't you? Well, let's go. Oh, God. Hard to keep up with. Here's the power supply board. I've managed to free it from the rest of the unit without any real damage. It has something interesting I haven't seen before of this strange type of connector. The way it works is you basically loosen it up like that, and then you poke the wires on the other side into it, push it back, and it locks on the wires. So rather than have a pre-built cable with all the wires kind of built into the connector. That's the method they used here, and they use this on most of the connectors on this board. So here's our primary item of interest, this large capacitor with the bulge on top. And next step is going to be to desolder that. I've already found another one from another project. This came out of a $3 computer quality subwoofer that I bought. So this is a little different physical size, but it'll work. It's a little shorter, a little larger diameter. This is 10,000 microfarads at 25 volts. That replaces 10,000 microfarads at 16 volts. So we'll substitute that as our next project. Desoldered the capacitor here. Here it is lifted off. 10,000 microfarads, 16 volts. Here's the replacement. 10,000 microfarads, 25 volts. So the same value of microfarads, you can always go up in voltage on a capacitor. So that's not an issue. These are polarized electrolytic capacitors. This has a minus marking here. This one also had a minus marking. You can see by the little adhesive stuff they put there where that fit in. Appears that this circuit board is marked with kind of a light colored area there to indicate negative. So we can put that in. I've had to bend the leads in just a little bit because it's a slightly we'll solder that larger up, diameter. Put it back together. Fits in pretty nicely there. Now another odd problem I ran into, it has this this really brittle, hard stuff on it. I tried to scrape that off with an X-Acto knife, and I ended up kind of slicing into the capacitor. So as kind of a, I don't think that's an issue. It's just a little scratch on the surface of the, but I'm going to put a little of this adhesive on here just to kind of seal it up. Probably not even necessary, but you know, we're just making it up as we go along. At this point I've installed the new capacitor. It isn't pretty, but it fits nicely, and based on the specifications it should work fine. Here's my little gasket adhesive that I used as a little sealant. We've got two small signal type transistors here, and everything along this edge is connected to the heat sink in a thermal sense. So you know, full wave bridge rectifiers, associated filtering capacitors. So that's what this board is all about. And given that my thought was that the flickering and the shutdown related to the power supply, this is a pretty good candidate to look for the problems. Here it is all put back together. This is our capacitor that was replaced. Managed to get all the screws and everything back in. These screws, you have to use a right angle screwdriver, which was a pain in the neck, but we got it. Ready to turn it on for the first time. Hit the on button here. We should see our same 0.7 watts as before. Let's turn it on and see if it stays on. Did I forget to hook something up? There's no front panel display, although it's drawing a reasonable number of watts in the 30 range. So I'll check it out again and make sure I got everything hooked up. Well, I've been shooting this over the last few days, and Scooter's gotten increasingly fearless. But I see the problem, which is I left this one cable unconnected. Evidently that's something important. I'm guessing it goes to the display board. Got that cable plugged in. Turn on over here at the power strip. I heard a little click. We've got a nice 2-channel stereo showing there. So that cable was indeed the problem, and even better, it's not flickering, it's not shutting itself off. So looking pretty good with that new capacitor. Next I'm going to get bold and put in some music and some speakers. Got some no copyright music suitable for YouTube ready here. Turn it on. Still hopefully good like it was before. And we go to, I'm set up on V-aux. So let's play Elevator. Yay, it works! Hooray! Score one for the good guys. No problems with volume control at this point. Maybe in retrospect the problems with the volume control were related to a bad power supply on this control board. We have some LEDs here that look a little dim, but after having fixed that capacitor, I thought I'd try out the video section of this, which I haven't tested yet through all of this, and the remote control. I've got power turned on the power strip. This is a Yamaha compatible third-party control that I've used that hopefully will work on this unit. Yep, that's good. Screw's having all kinds of fun back here if you're wondering what the noise is all about. Hey you. No excuses. I've got this cheap Blu-ray player that I picked up at a thrift store hooked up. Let's see. So we're passing through the HDMI. This is the kind of home screen of the Blu-ray player, obviously. So that's good. Switch to another input and another one. It'll go blank back to 1. Guess we'll call the HDMI a success. I'm going to separately try out the other 3 inputs, but there's every chance they'll work. So we've got a fully functional unit here. One element I haven't tried yet is the surround channels and the subwoofer output. I'll probably just look at those separately. We don't need to show those to you here, but I think that completes the tests that we're going to cover in this video. So we're done. Thanks for watching, and bye-bye.